Officer Abigail Adams had been patrolling the streets of her small Texas town for years, earning respect from her colleagues and the community alike for her dedication and calm courage. On a warm evening, as the sun dipped behind the low hills, she sat in her patrol car finishing her paperwork when a strange call came over the radio. The voice on the other end was hurried, almost frantic, and it came from the county jail. Something unusual was happening inside the facility, but the caller could not clearly explain what. Abigail felt a jolt of concern and immediately started the engine, her mind racing with possibilities. She had seen her share of disturbances, but there was something about the urgency in that voice that made her instincts scream caution. As she drove through the quiet streets, past dimly lit shops and houses with children playing in the yards, she wondered what she would find. When she arrived at the jail, the heavy metal gates creaked open, and she saw the flickering lights inside, casting long shadows on the walls. The building was usually calm at this hour, with only the night staff and a few prisoners inside, but tonight, something felt different, almost alive. Inside the main corridor, the air was thick and still, carrying a strange tension that made Abigail's skin prickle. She noticed a prisoner standing near the back, someone she had seen before: Benjamin Franklin, a quiet, intelligent man who had been in trouble with the law but was never violent. His eyes, however, were wide with a mixture of fear and urgency that caught her attention immediately. "Ma'am," Benjamin whispered, lowering his voice as if someone else might hear them, "you shouldn't be here. Something is wrong." Abigail tilted her head, trying to gauge whether he was joking or serious. "What do you mean?" she asked softly, taking a careful step closer. Benjamin shook his head quickly, his expression tense. "Don't talk. Just trust me. Please." The unusual seriousness in his voice made her pause. She had faced dangerous situations before, but there was a raw honesty in his fear that compelled her to listen. As she followed him down a dim hallway, she noticed that the usual hum of the fluorescent lights was replaced by a strange silence. Even the usual noises of prisoners moving or guards patrolling were absent, as though the building itself was holding its breath. Benjamin led her to a side corridor she had never noticed before, one that appeared to be rarely used. "This way," he murmured, glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one else was around. The walls were lined with old lockers and dusty filing cabinets, and the air smelled faintly of old paper and metal. Abigail's pulse quickened. She had spent years in law enforcement, but she had never experienced a moment that felt so heavy with anticipation. Every step seemed to echo too loudly, as if the building itself was listening. Benjamin paused at a small, unmarked metal door. "Behind this," he said, "you'll see something no one is supposed to know about. If the wrong people find out we are here, it won't end well." Abigail swallowed hard but nodded. She had learned to trust her instincts, and right now, they told her that Benjamin was telling the truth. She slowly reached for the door handle, feeling the cold metal under her fingertips. Just as she was about to push it open, a sudden crash echoed from somewhere deeper in the jail. The sound made both of them jump, and Abigail's hand instinctively went to her side, where her service weapon rested. "Stay close," she whispered, and Benjamin nodded. They moved cautiously into the next room, where shadows flickered along the walls as if something unseen was moving in the corners of her vision. Abigail's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had been trained to assess threats, but this was unlike anything she had ever encountered. The room was small and filled with rows of filing cabinets and old desks. Papers were scattered on the floor as though someone had been searching frantically for something or trying to hide it. Benjamin knelt down and pointed at a stack of files, his hand trembling slightly. This is what I found when I was placed here. They have been keeping secrets, terrible secrets, for years. People who shouldn't have been hurt, they've suffered in silence. Abigail's eyes widened as she bent down to examine the files. Each folder contained names, dates, and notes that suggested a pattern of hidden crimes and abuses that were impossible to ignore. She felt a surge of anger and determination. "We have to get this out," she said quietly, though she knew they had to be careful. Benjamin nodded solemnly. "Yes, but not yet. If we are seen, they will make sure nothing survives. We have to act smart." Suddenly, a faint whisper echoed through the room, though no one else was visible. Abigail froze, listening. The sound was soft but urgent, almost like someone trying to warn them. Benjamin grabbed her arm gently. "That's why I told you not to talk. They don't want anyone knowing. Even speaking can trigger something. Just follow me." With careful, measured steps, they moved deeper into the hidden area. Abigail's mind was racing. She had encountered corruption and cover ups before, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. The shadows seemed to move around them, and the faint hum of the old lights made the room feel alive in a way that was unnerving. As they reached the far end of the corridor, Benjamin stopped and pointed to a small room with a metal door slightly ajar. Inside, Abigail could see more stacks of files, computers, and devices she didn't recognize. Her pulse quickened as she realized the magnitude of what they had uncovered. "This is it," Benjamin said, his voice barely above a whisper. "All of it, right here. They've been hiding it from everyone." Abigail stepped inside slowly, her eyes scanning the room. She could feel the weight of the evidence in front of her, the proof of secrets that had destroyed lives in silence. And then she noticed a small figure crouched in the corner, a young girl with wide, fearful eyes. Abigail's heart clenched. She had expected files, but not a living soul who had been trapped, forgotten, or hidden. The girl looked at them, trembling, and Abigail's protective instincts surged. "It's okay," she whispered gently. "You're safe now." Benjamin looked at Abigail, his expression serious. "We need to get her out, too. Everyone in here deserves to be free." Abigail nodded, her determination solidifying into action. They couldn't call for help yet, it was too dangerous. Whoever had orchestrated this had eyes everywhere, and the consequences of being discovered too soon could be catastrophic. But she also knew that leaving without a plan would be no better. They had to be careful, clever, and brave. As they moved through the room, gathering files and quietly guiding the girl, the shadows seemed to shift around them, almost watching, almost testing them. Abigail's heart raced, but she forced herself to focus. She was a trained officer, but tonight she felt something more, an urgency that came from knowing that innocent lives depended on her courage. The night stretched on, and the weight of the hidden truths pressed down on her like never before. But she also felt a strange sense of purpose, a deep connection with Benjamin, and a responsibility that she could not ignore. Somewhere in the shadows of that old Texas jail, secrets had been kept for decades, and now, for the first time, someone had come to uncover them. Abigail took a deep breath, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that the night was far from over, but that her courage, her careful actions, and her trust in Benjamin might be the key to saving not only the girl but countless others who had suffered in silence. Abigail Adams followed Benjamin Franklin through the narrow, dim corridor, her footsteps echoing softly against the cold, concrete walls, the weight of what they had just discovered pressing heavily on her mind. Every step felt tense, as though the building itself was alive, aware of their presence and watching them. Benjamin moved quietly but with purpose, occasionally glancing over his shoulder to ensure they were not being followed, his eyes sharp and alert despite the fear Abigail could see in them. She kept her hand close to her side, ready for anything, though she had no idea exactly what they might encounter. The young girl they had found clung to Benjamin's coat, her small fingers trembling, and Abigail felt a surge of protective instinct she could not ignore. The shadows in the hallway seemed to flicker with every movement, twisting and stretching in ways that made her feel uneasy, though she saw no one else. Benjamin stopped briefly at a junction in the hallway and gestured toward a hidden staircase leading downward. "This is where it starts," he whispered, his voice low but urgent. "They have rooms down here that no one ever knows about, rooms where they've kept things, people, files, secrets. We need to see it, but we must be careful." Abigail nodded, swallowing the lump of apprehension in her throat. She had faced dangerous criminals before, but this was different. This was something planned, hidden, and insidious, something that had persisted for years without being challenged. As they descended the narrow staircase, the air grew colder, and a faint metallic smell mixed with dust reached Abigail's senses. The sound of dripping water echoed through the stairwell, creating a rhythm that matched the pounding of her heart. Benjamin paused at the bottom, pointing to a pair of heavy metal doors partially hidden in the shadows. "Behind this," he said, "is where they keep the files and people they want no one to know about. Everything we have seen so far is only a fraction of what's here." Abigail took a deep breath, her mind racing. She realized that uncovering this would not just expose wrongdoing, it could save lives. She glanced at the young girl, who was now clutching her arm, eyes wide with fear but trusting her completely. "We'll get through this," Abigail said softly, though she hoped her voice sounded more confident than she felt. Benjamin pushed the doors open slowly, and a dim light spilled out from inside the room, revealing rows of filing cabinets, stacks of paper, and old, dusty crates. The files were labeled with dates, names, and codes, some written in a hurried scrawl that suggested panic or secrecy. Abigail's eyes widened as she scanned the contents. This was far worse than she had imagined. People had been hidden, their lives controlled and ruined, evidence of abuse and corruption carefully concealed for years. And the young girl's presence reminded her that some victims were still suffering, still trapped in silence. Benjamin moved carefully toward one of the cabinets and began pulling out files, his hands shaking slightly as he passed them to Abigail. She took each one, scanning quickly but carefully, realizing that these documents could expose the truth, but only if handled correctly. "We need to find more than just files," Benjamin said, his voice tense. "We need proof of what they've done here, who is responsible, and how long this has been going on. Otherwise, they will deny it, and nothing will change." Abigail nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She had always believed in justice, but now she understood that achieving it might require extraordinary courage. As they continued to explore, they found small rooms off the main area, each containing more files, computers, and strange devices that Abigail could not identify. The room at the end of the corridor held a metal cage, empty but ominous, with marks on the floor suggesting it had recently been used. Abigail shivered at the sight, realizing that lives had been confined and controlled here, just as the files indicated. Benjamin knelt beside a small stack of papers, his eyes scanning the details. "They've been planning this for years," he said quietly. "The people they've hurt, some never left. Some didn't survive. This isn't just corruption, it's cruelty hidden behind rules and uniforms." Abigail felt a knot of anger tighten in her chest. She had trained herself to respond calmly to danger, but this was different. This was evil, hidden in plain sight, and it demanded action. She glanced at Benjamin, whose normally calm face was now drawn with tension, worry, and determination. "We need to get evidence, and we need to get the people out," she said firmly. Benjamin nodded, and together, they moved to the next room, where the shadows seemed thicker, almost pressing against them. The young girl followed, hiding behind Abigail's legs, her small hands gripping the hem of Abigail's uniform. As they opened the door, a sudden noise made them freeze. Somewhere in the darkness, a metal cabinet fell, scattering papers across the floor with a loud clatter. Abigail's heart jumped, and she instinctively raised her hand, signaling Benjamin to stop. They waited, listening carefully. Nothing moved, and after a few tense moments, they continued. "They're watching us," Benjamin whispered. "I can feel it. But we can't stop now. We've come too far." Abigail nodded, determination hardening in her chest. They found more files, more hidden compartments, and a small, locked room with a single, old cot. The girl peeked inside, and Abigail saw faint drawings on the wall, childish images that contrasted sharply with the fear she could feel radiating from the space. She knelt beside the girl. "You're safe now," she whispered again, gently taking the girl's hand. Benjamin began unlocking the door with tools he had kept hidden, and the sound of the tumblers clicking seemed deafening in the silence. When the door finally swung open, Abigail felt a rush of relief. Another small room revealed a few more frightened people, each looking as if they had been waiting for someone to notice them for years. Abigail's heart ached at their faces, but she knew that they had a chance now, thanks to Benjamin's courage and her own resolve. As they moved to guide the people out, shadows shifted again, as though unseen eyes followed their every step. Abigail remained calm, using the skills she had developed over years in law enforcement, but she could not ignore the strange feeling that the building itself was alive with secrets that had waited decades to be uncovered. Benjamin passed her more files, and she carefully placed them in her bag, understanding that these documents could change everything if they reached the right people. "We have to be quick," he said, glancing at her nervously. "They could discover us any moment." Abigail nodded, her focus unwavering. She had never felt a stronger sense of purpose. She had always wanted to protect her community, but tonight, that desire had grown into a mission to protect lives and reveal the truth. They moved as a quiet, determined group, leading the frightened individuals down the narrow hallway and back toward the staircase. Every sound, every flicker of shadow made Abigail's pulse quicken, but she did not falter. The young girl clung to her hand, trusting her completely, and that trust strengthened Abigail's resolve. At the bottom of the stairs, Benjamin paused once more, ensuring the way ahead was clear. Abigail felt a moment of fear but also a surge of hope. "We're almost there," he whispered. "Just a little further." The hall ahead opened into a larger room, with the faint glow of the exit sign marking freedom, and Abigail felt a wave of relief wash over her. Yet she knew the danger was not over. They still had to reach the outside without being seen, and they had to ensure the files were safe. As they stepped forward cautiously, the shadows seemed to retreat slightly, and Abigail realized that courage, trust, and careful action were their strongest allies. Together, they would face whatever came next, knowing that exposing the truth and saving lives was worth any risk. For Abigail, this night would be remembered not for fear, but for the determination to act when it truly mattered, guided by a prisoner who had chosen to help instead of hiding, and by the unspoken promise that no one would suffer in silence again. Abigail Adams led the small group carefully through the final corridor toward the exit, her senses alert to every sound, every flicker of shadow that might indicate danger, while Benjamin Franklin stayed close, scanning the walls and corners for any sign that someone might discover them, and the young girl clung tightly to Abigail's hand, trusting her completely as they moved forward. The air grew cooler as they approached the back of the jail, where an old service door led to the outside, but Abigail could feel the tension in her chest, a mixture of fear, responsibility, and determination that made her steps deliberate and measured. Every noise seemed amplified in the silence, the faint dripping of water from the ceiling, the distant creak of a door, the soft rustling of papers in the rooms they had passed all reminded Abigail of how fragile their progress was and how careful they had to be. Benjamin whispered to her, pointing at a small security camera that had gone unnoticed in the shadows. "That's one of the new ones they installed last month. If it sees us, the alarms will go off instantly. We need to move slowly and stay in the blind spots." Abigail nodded, her mind calculating the safest path, while the young girl peered up at her with wide, anxious eyes, and Abigail offered a reassuring smile, squeezing her hand gently to convey calm. As they reached a narrow stairwell leading to the ground level, Abigail paused to let the group catch up, glancing back at the frightened people they were guiding. Faces that had been pale with fear now showed tiny sparks of hope, and Abigail realized that in this moment, the lives of all these individuals depended not only on her courage but on the trust they placed in her and Benjamin. When they finally reached the bottom of the stairs, they were met with a heavy, reinforced door leading outside, which Abigail could see was slightly ajar. She moved forward cautiously, pushing the door just enough to peer through. Outside, the night was calm, the air fresh and cool, filled with the faint scent of grass and earth from the surrounding yard. The moonlight illuminated the path ahead, and Abigail's heart lifted slightly at the sight of freedom so near, yet she knew they could not rush, the guards could still appear at any moment, and the group had to stay quiet to avoid detection. Benjamin moved forward first, checking the area and signaling with a hand gesture that it was safe, then guiding Abigail and the group out step by step. The young girl whispered something Abigail couldn't hear, and Abigail leaned down, listening carefully. "It's okay," she whispered, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's face. "You're safe now. We're almost out." As they crossed the yard, a faint noise from the building made Abigail freeze instantly. Shadows shifted in the corner of her vision, and she instinctively placed herself in front of the girl and the others, ready for any confrontation. Benjamin moved to intercept whatever might emerge, and together they pressed forward, slow and steady, toward the chain-link fence marking the outer boundary of the jail grounds. Abigail's mind raced as she thought of the files they had collected, the evidence of hidden crimes, secret experiments, and people who had been trapped and forgotten. Each step toward freedom felt heavier with the weight of responsibility, knowing that these documents could expose the truth but could also put them in danger if mishandled. Reaching the fence, Abigail noticed that it was slightly bent at one corner, perhaps from old maintenance work. Benjamin examined it quickly and nodded. "We can slip through here. It's not perfect, but it's our best chance." Abigail helped the first few individuals through, steadying them and offering quiet words of encouragement. The young girl was next, and Abigail knelt down, lifting her gently through the gap in the fence, feeling the girl's trembling body against hers and whispering soothing words as she set her safely on the other side. Benjamin followed, and then Abigail herself, feeling the cool night air rush past her as she moved out of the shadows and into the open. For a moment, they all stood silently, catching their breath, listening to the quiet of the night and feeling the relief of having escaped the immediate danger. But Abigail knew that their mission was not complete. The evidence they carried needed to reach the right people, and the story of the hidden crimes had to be told. She turned to Benjamin, who looked exhausted but resolute, and gave him a small nod. "We did it this far," she said softly. "Now we finish it?" Benjamin's eyes met hers, and she could see the gratitude and determination mirrored in them. "We can't stop now," he said. "We need to make sure this gets out. People need to know." Abigail agreed, her mind already racing with plans to contact trusted authorities and journalists who could safely handle the files and make the story public without endangering anyone else. As they moved away from the fence and toward a nearby tree line that would provide cover, Abigail reflected on the bravery of everyone involved, the quiet courage of Benjamin, the resilience of the people they had rescued, and the trust the young girl had placed in her. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of courage, done at the right time, could change lives in ways no one could predict. Benjamin led them through the trees, careful to avoid the paths that might lead back to the jail, and Abigail kept her eyes and ears alert, making mental notes of landmarks and safe routes they could use to reach the town without being detected. The night was calm, but every shadow seemed alive with possibility, and Abigail knew that this calm could be deceptive. They had to maintain vigilance until they were safely among people who could help. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only a short walk, they reached the outskirts of the town, where the streets were quiet and only a few lights shone from distant houses. Abigail signaled the group to pause, then looked at Benjamin. "This is where we separate for now," she said. "I'll take the files and make sure they get to the right people. You, stay safe. You've already risked so much." Benjamin shook his head firmly. "No. We finish this together. You can't do it alone, and neither can I. We need to make sure every piece of evidence is safe." Abigail nodded, understanding the determination in his voice. Together, they moved toward the safe house Abigail had contacted earlier, where trusted authorities and journalists were waiting. Every step was careful, deliberate, and filled with the quiet tension of knowing how important this moment was. As they approached the safe house, the young girl tugged on Abigail's hand. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling but sincere. Abigail knelt down and smiled gently. "You don't have to thank me. We're just making sure everyone gets a chance to be safe. That's what matters." Inside the safe house, Abigail and Benjamin laid out the files, reviewing each document carefully, making sure nothing was missing, and preparing them for secure delivery. Abigail felt a mixture of relief and resolve. They had made it out alive, but the fight to reveal the truth had just begun. Benjamin looked at her with tired eyes. "We've done the hardest part," he said. "Now we just need to make sure it counts." Abigail nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility and the promise of justice pressing on her shoulders. The people they had rescued were safe for now, the evidence was secure, and the night had shown her the strength of courage, trust, and determination. She realized that sometimes heroes were not those with fame or recognition, but ordinary people who acted at the right time with bravery and heart. As the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, Abigail felt a quiet satisfaction mixed with anticipation. The story was far from over, but she knew that with careful planning and unwavering courage, the truth would come out, and those who had suffered in silence would finally have their voices heard. Abigail Adams carefully led the small group into the safe house, the weight of the files pressing against her shoulder and the anxious energy of those they had rescued making the room feel smaller and more tense than it actually was, while Benjamin Franklin stayed close, scanning the surroundings with a practiced eye, ensuring no one had followed them from the jail, and the young girl, though still trembling slightly, clung to Abigail's hand, her small face filled with both fear and relief. Inside, the safe house was quiet except for the soft hum of a heater and the faint ticking of a clock on the wall, and Abigail took a deep breath, allowing herself a brief moment to feel the relief of having made it this far without being discovered. Benjamin carefully placed the files on a sturdy table, spreading them out so that each document could be seen and organized, and Abigail helped him, checking dates, names, and notes, realizing just how much hidden injustice had been occurring right under the noses of people who trusted the system. "We have more than enough to make them pay attention now," Benjamin whispered, his voice low but determined, and Abigail nodded, her mind already thinking about the right contacts who could handle this safely and ensure the evidence reached trustworthy authorities and journalists without putting anyone in danger. The young girl peeked at the files from behind Abigail, her curiosity overcoming some of her fear, and Abigail smiled gently. "These papers show the truth," she explained softly. "But we have to be careful with them. They will help people understand what has been happening, and that's why we need to protect them until the right people see them." Benjamin glanced at Abigail, admiration in his eyes for her calm authority and careful planning. "You've led us well tonight," he said quietly. "Without you, none of this would have worked. I only hope we can finish what we started without anyone getting hurt." Abigail felt the weight of responsibility pressing on her chest, but also a sense of determination that strengthened her resolve. "We will finish it," she replied firmly. "We owe it to the people we found, and to everyone else who has suffered in silence." As they continued to organize the evidence, Abigail's mind drifted to the small details of what they had uncovered: the hidden rooms, the frightened individuals, the shadows that had seemed alive, and the eerie silence that had made the jail feel more like a trap than a place of law and order. She realized that what they had faced was not just criminal behavior, it was a system built to hide wrongdoing and manipulate people's trust, and it would take careful planning, courage, and determination to expose it. Benjamin leaned closer, pointing at a set of files that contained particularly sensitive information. "These will be the hardest to release," he said quietly. "They could put us at risk if the wrong person sees them before they reach the right hands." Abigail nodded, understanding immediately. "Then we prioritize. We make sure the right authorities get these first, and then we handle the rest carefully. We can't risk anyone's safety, but we also can't let this go unnoticed." The young girl sat quietly on a chair nearby, her small hands folded in her lap, watching Abigail and Benjamin work, and for a moment, Abigail allowed herself to notice the hope beginning to form in the child's eyes, a hope that she and Benjamin had managed to create simply by being there and by acting with courage when it mattered most. Hours passed as they carefully sorted the files, marked the most urgent documents, and prepared everything for secure delivery. Abigail felt fatigue pressing on her, but she did not allow herself to slow down. She knew that the safety of the people they had rescued and the success of their mission depended on her focus and persistence. Benjamin occasionally glanced out the windows, checking the quiet street and making sure they remained unnoticed, and Abigail admired his vigilance, knowing that it complemented her own methodical approach perfectly. As dawn approached, the first rays of sunlight filtering through the blinds, Abigail realized they were ready to move. The files were secure, the rescued individuals were calm and safe for the moment, and their plan to reach authorities and journalists had been carefully thought out to avoid any leaks or danger. She turned to Benjamin. "We leave soon," she said softly. "We take the files to the contacts we trust, and we make sure the truth gets out. No matter what it takes." Benjamin nodded, a mixture of determination and quiet relief on his face. "Then let's do it. It's time the world knows what has been happening here." They moved quietly, guiding the small group through a back exit of the safe house and onto a narrow alley that would lead them to a secure vehicle waiting a few blocks away. Abigail kept her eyes on the surroundings, alert to every sound and movement, while Benjamin helped the rescued people navigate the uneven pavement, and the young girl stayed close, still holding Abigail's hand tightly. The early morning was calm, almost serene, but Abigail knew better than to trust appearances. Danger could appear at any moment, and she remained focused, knowing that one mistake could undo everything they had achieved. When they reached the waiting vehicle, Abigail opened the door and helped the first few people inside, making sure everyone was seated safely. Benjamin followed, helping the young girl into the seat next to Abigail, who offered a reassuring smile and gently brushed the hair from the girl's face. The drive through the quiet streets was tense, every moment filled with anticipation and cautious hope. Abigail carefully navigated to the predetermined safe location, where trusted authorities and journalists would be waiting to receive the files. She felt a mix of fatigue, relief, and determination, knowing that the most critical part of their mission was about to begin: the exposure of the hidden crimes and the protection of those who had suffered in silence for so long. As they arrived at the secure location, Abigail parked the vehicle and helped the rescued individuals out, guiding them into the building where friendly faces welcomed them and reassured them that they were now safe. Benjamin handed over the first batch of files to the trusted authorities, explaining the details calmly and methodically, while Abigail stayed close, ensuring everything was handled with care and precision. She watched as the journalists and officials began to understand the magnitude of what had been uncovered, realizing that the courage and determination they had shown that night would now ripple outward, touching lives far beyond the walls of the jail. The young girl, now smiling faintly, hugged Abigail's hand briefly and whispered, "Thank you." Abigail knelt down to meet her gaze. "You were very brave," she said gently. "And now you're safe. That's what matters." Benjamin placed a hand on Abigail's shoulder, silently acknowledging the teamwork and trust that had brought them this far. Abigail felt a swell of pride and relief, knowing that together they had achieved something extraordinary. Though the files were now in safe hands and the rescued individuals were protected, Abigail understood that the journey was not yet complete. The story still needed to be told, justice still needed to be served, and the people responsible for hiding the truth still needed to be held accountable. But in this moment, in the quiet of the early morning, she allowed herself to feel the satisfaction of having taken the first crucial steps, knowing that courage, careful planning, and unwavering determination could indeed change lives. As the sun began to rise over the small Texas town, Abigail, Benjamin, and the rescued group stood together, united by their shared experience, strengthened by their trust in each other, and ready to face whatever came next. The shadows of the past had been confronted, the truth had begun to emerge, and for the first time in a long while, Abigail felt a sense of hope, a hope that justice, once hidden, would finally reach the light. As the sun climbed higher over the quiet streets of the small Texas town, Officer Abigail Adams watched the rescued individuals settle into the safe house, their expressions a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and cautious hope, while Benjamin Franklin quietly moved among them, offering words of encouragement and reassurance, and the young girl, now sitting close to Abigail, smiled faintly for the first time in what seemed like forever, a small sign that their courage and careful planning had already begun to change lives. Abigail felt a deep sense of satisfaction but knew their mission was far from over. The files they had collected contained proof of long-hidden wrongdoing, evidence that could not only expose the jail's corrupt practices but also prevent future suffering, yet she also understood that rushing could put everyone at risk, so patience and precision were crucial. She carefully reviewed the files once more, checking for completeness, cross-referencing names and dates, and ensuring nothing had been overlooked, while Benjamin contacted the trusted authorities and journalists who had agreed to receive the evidence safely, giving careful instructions on how to handle the information to protect everyone involved. The young girl, now calmer, watched them with quiet curiosity, occasionally asking questions in a soft voice, and Abigail responded patiently, explaining that sometimes the right action required courage, teamwork, and careful planning, lessons she hoped the child would carry forward in life. Hours passed as they coordinated the secure transfer of the files, organizing them into groups for delivery, marking the most urgent documents, and preparing statements to accompany them, and Abigail felt a deep appreciation for Benjamin's insight and bravery, recognizing that without his willingness to act despite fear, none of this would have been possible. Outside, the town began to stir with the sounds of daily life, birds singing, doors opening, and distant voices echoing down the streets, yet inside the safe house, a different kind of life was unfolding, a life of careful hope, determination, and the quiet knowledge that the truth was finally going to be revealed. Benjamin leaned against a table, exhausted but satisfied, watching Abigail as she meticulously went through the last batch of files, and he finally spoke softly, "You know, Abigail, I've never met anyone who could lead with such calm and courage in the middle of chaos. I think these people are going to be okay because of you." Abigail looked at him and smiled faintly, feeling a warmth in her chest despite the fatigue. "It wasn't just me," she said gently. "It was all of us together. You, me, the people we rescued, we all played a part. Courage isn't just one person's job, it's shared when people care enough to act." Benjamin nodded, appreciating the truth in her words, and together they turned their attention to the final preparations for delivery. As the morning wore on, a trusted group of journalists and officials arrived, carefully escorted by Abigail and Benjamin, and the files were handed over in a secure and organized manner, each document checked and double-checked, with careful notes detailing the hidden crimes and the suffering endured by those trapped in silence. Abigail watched as the journalists' eyes widened with understanding, as the authorities nodded solemnly, recognizing the significance of the evidence, and she felt a quiet pride knowing that justice was no longer a distant hope but a possibility that could now be pursued with truth and clarity. The rescued individuals, now seated safely in a different part of the house, began to interact with each other, sharing stories in whispers, smiles forming on faces that had been tense and fearful just hours before, and Abigail felt a deep sense of relief knowing that they were safe, at least for now, and that their voices would finally have a chance to be heard. Benjamin quietly observed the young girl, who had begun drawing small pictures on a notepad, her expression focused yet calm, and he realized how important it was to protect the innocence and hope of people like her, to ensure that the courage shown tonight had lasting consequences beyond the immediate danger. Abigail joined him, glancing at the girl, and whispered softly, "She's going to be okay. We've given her a chance to grow up without fear, and that's worth everything." Benjamin nodded, his eyes reflecting both gratitude and quiet determination, and for a moment, the tension of the night lifted, replaced by a fragile but growing sense of hope. Once the files had been securely delivered, Abigail and Benjamin returned to the safe house, their steps slower now, fatigue settling heavily into their muscles, but their hearts lightened by the knowledge that their efforts had made a difference. Abigail sat in a chair, looking at the group of rescued people, their faces slowly relaxing as they realized the danger had passed, and she felt a profound sense of accomplishment and responsibility, knowing that their courage tonight had not only saved lives but also begun to unravel years of hidden injustice. Benjamin approached her quietly and spoke, "It's over for now, but we need to stay alert. There are still people who don't want this truth revealed. We need to be ready if anything happens." Abigail nodded, her expression serious but calm. We will be ready. But we also need to allow ourselves a moment to breathe, to recognize what we've done tonight. Courage isn't only about acting in the moment, it's about holding on to hope afterward, too. As the morning sun grew brighter, casting soft light into the safe house, the young girl approached Abigail and handed her a small drawing, a picture of people holding hands under a bright sun. Abigail smiled, touched by the gesture, and placed the drawing on the table beside her, a symbol of hope and the promise of a better future. Benjamin watched the interaction silently, understanding that these small moments were just as important as the evidence they had secured, as they reminded everyone involved why courage, trust, and compassion mattered. Throughout the day, Abigail coordinated with authorities to ensure the safety of everyone involved and to verify that the files would lead to formal investigations and, ultimately, justice for those who had suffered. She spoke with journalists calmly, providing context without revealing unnecessary details that could compromise anyone's safety, and Benjamin stayed nearby, quietly supporting her, ready to intervene if needed, but also giving her space to lead with the calm authority that had guided them through the night. As the afternoon progressed, Abigail felt a quiet sense of closure settling over her, knowing that the immediate danger had passed, the evidence was secure, and the rescued individuals were safe. She reflected on the events of the night, the shadows in the jail, the fear and courage, the trust and determination, and realized that these experiences had changed her, deepened her understanding of responsibility, and strengthened her belief in the power of ordinary people to make extraordinary differences. Benjamin approached her once more, quietly saying, "We did it. They'll know the truth now, and the people we saved will have a chance at real life." Abigail smiled, a mixture of relief and quiet pride shining in her eyes. "Yes," she said softly. "And maybe someday, that courage will inspire others to act when it matters, too. That's how real change happens, one brave choice at a time." The young girl, now sitting nearby, looked up at Abigail and Benjamin with trust and admiration, and Abigail felt a warm reassurance that their actions had truly made a lasting impact, not only in exposing the hidden crimes but in giving hope, safety, and a sense of justice to those who had been forgotten for far too long. As the day drew to a close, Abigail and Benjamin stood together near the window, looking out at the town that was slowly returning to its quiet rhythm, and she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. They had faced danger, uncovered long-hidden truths, and protected lives, all through courage, trust, and careful action. The shadows of the past had been confronted, and the light of truth was beginning to shine, not just for those rescued but for the entire community. Abigail knew that the night's events would stay with her forever, a reminder that even in the darkest places, courage and compassion could prevail, and that ordinary people, when guided by conscience and bravery, could change the course of lives and history itself. Benjamin quietly placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of partnership and shared purpose, and Abigail, feeling the weight of the night's events lift slightly, knew that they had not only survived a dangerous mission but had also achieved something meaningful, enduring, and truly heroic. Together, they turned their attention to the people they had saved, the evidence they had secured, and the future they were helping to protect, knowing that their courage had made a difference, and that the truth, once hidden in the shadows, would now have its chance to shine in the light of justice and hope.